Caesarea, Palestine, around 220 AD. Julius Africanus sets down his pen. His hands are trembling. Before him, two scrolls, the Gospel of Matthew, the Gospel of Luke. He has just done a calculation that no one before him had dared to do. 27 generations in Matthew between David and Joseph, 42 generations in Luke. 15 ancestors apart, for the same man. And that's not the worst part. Joseph's father is called Jacob in one, Heli in the other. This is not a copyist's error. This is not a theological nuance. This is a contradiction, black on white, in the sacred book. Julius Africanus closes his eyes. He knows what this discovery means. If the two Gospels contradict each other on something as verifiable as a family tree, then the entire edifice is shaking. He has two choices: reveal the flaw and watch everything collapse, or invent an explanation, any explanation, however absurd it might be. He picks up his pen again, and during the hours that follow, he will write one of the greatest intellectual contortions in the history of Christianity. An explanation so convoluted that it will hold for 18 centuries, until another man, a Catholic priest this time, decides it was time to tell the truth. This priest was called Raymond Brown, and what he wrote made the Vatican tremble. Before continuing, this video does not seek to destroy your faith. It seeks to show you what the texts really say, what historians have discovered, what the contradictions reveal. After that, it's your choice, your reflection, your conclusion. You deserve to know. That's the necessary perspective. Who was Julius Africanus? A learned Christian of the 3rd century, a traveler, an intellectual, one of the first to attempt to write a universal chronology of human history from Adam to his era. A brilliant man, meticulous, obsessed with dates and genealogies. Born around 160 AD, probably in Jerusalem, Julius Africanus traveled throughout the Roman Empire. He visited Alexandria, where he studied in the famous library. He met the greatest scholars of his time. He corresponded with Origen, one of the most influential theologians in Christian history. And above all, he wrote. His major work, the Chronographies, attempted to synchronize all of human history, biblical, Greek, Roman, Egyptian, into a single coherent chronology. 5 volumes, thousands of dates, hundreds of genealogies, a titanic work. To accomplish this work, Julius Africanus had to compare sources, cross-reference information, verify coherences. And it was precisely this obsession that led him to the edge of the abyss. Because when you're obsessed with genealogies, you end up comparing them. And when you compare Jesus's genealogies in Matthew and Luke, you discover a problem, a huge problem. Matthew begins his gospel with these words: "The book of the genealogy of Jesus, Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham." Then he lists the ancestors, from Abraham to David, from David to the deportation to Babylon, from Babylon to Joseph. 3 series of 14 generations, 42 names in total. It's clean, it's symmetrical, it's theological. Luke does things differently. He places his genealogy not at the beginning of his gospel, but after Jesus' baptism in chapter 3. And he goes back in time, from Joseph to Adam, to God himself. 77 generations. 2 genealogies, 2 different structures, 2 different objectives. So far, one might say, well, these are complementary approaches. But here's the problem. The names don't match. In Matthew, Joseph is the son of Jacob. In Luke, Joseph is the son of Heli. Jacob and Heli. 2 different names for the father of the same man. And that's just the beginning. In Matthew, David's lineage passes through Solomon, the glorious son, the builder of the temple. In Luke, David's lineage passes through Nathan, another son of David, about whom we know almost nothing. 2 completely different branches of the Davidic tree. Then, between David and Joseph. Matthew counts 27 generations. Luke counts 42 generations. 15 generations apart. 15 ancestors. 15 human lives. 15 births, marriages, deaths. This is not a small difference. This is a chasm. Julius Africanus saw this chasm, and he understood what it meant. If the 2 Gospels, both considered inspired by God, contradict each other on something as concrete as a list of names, then how can one claim that the Bible is infallible? How can one pretend that these texts are the very word of God? It was a bomb that had to be diffused. And Julius Africanus found a solution, an ingenious solution, twisted, but ingenious. He invented the concept of levirate genealogy. The idea is as follows. In Jewish law, there exists a practice called levirate marriage. When a man dies without a child, his brother must marry the widow and give her a son. This son is legally considered the child of the deceased, not of the biological father. This practice is described in Deuteronomy, chapter 25, verses 5 to 10. Its purpose was to preserve the name and inheritance of the deceased. Julius Africanus suggested that the difference between Matthew and Luke was explained thus. Jacob, the father according to Matthew, and Heli, the father according to Luke, were half-brothers. They had the same mother, but different fathers. The mother was called Esther, according to Julius. She had first married Mathan, from Solomon's lineage, by whom she had Jacob. Then, having become a widow, she had married Melchi, from Nathan's lineage, by whom she had Heli. Then, still according to Julius, Heli would have died without a child. Jacob, his half-brother, would have married his widow in accordance with levirate law. Joseph would have been born from this union. So Joseph would be biologically the son of Jacob, Matthew, but legally the son of Heli, Luke. Do you follow? It's complicated, it's convoluted, it's acrobatic, but it works, on paper. Julius Africanus presented this explanation in a letter to a certain Aristides. This letter was preserved by Eusebius of Caesarea in his Ecclesiastical History in the 4th century, and it became the official answer to the genealogy problem. This explanation was accepted for 18 centuries. Theologians repeated it, preachers taught it, believers believed it. Until someone looked more closely. Let's now look at these genealogies in detail, because the devil, if I may say so, is in the details. Matthew's genealogy, chapter 1, verses 1 to 17. Abraham begot Isaac. Isaac begot Jacob. Jacob begot Judah and his brothers. Judah begot Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Perez begot Hezron. Hezron begot Ram. Ram begot Amminadab. Amminadab begot Nahshon. Nahshon begot Salmon. Salmon begot Boaz by Rahab. Boaz begot Obed by Ruth. Obed begot Jesse. Jesse begot King David. Pause. Did you notice something? Matthew mentions women: Tamar, Rahab, Ruth. This is unusual. In Jewish genealogies, women are generally not mentioned. Why does Matthew do this? Keep this question in mind. We'll come back to it. Let's continue. David begot Solomon by the wife of Uriah. Another woman mentioned, Bathsheba. But Matthew doesn't even give her name. He calls her the wife of Uriah. Strange, isn't it? Solomon begot Rehoboam. Rehoboam begot Abijah. Abijah begot Asa. Asa begot Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat begot Joram. Joram begot Uzziah. Stop. There's a problem here. Joram did not beget Uzziah, not directly. If you consult the books of Kings and Chronicles in the Old Testament, you'll discover that Matthew skipped 3 generations. Between Joram and Uzziah there were Ahaziah, Joash, and Amaziah. 3 kings, 3 generations. Erased. Why? Because Matthew wanted to obtain exactly 14 generations per period. 3 times 14, 42. It's a symbolic number. 14 is the numerical value of the name David in Hebrew. D equals 4, V equals 6, D equals 4. Matthew sacrificed historical accuracy to obtain theological symmetry. This is not history. This is literary construction. Let's continue reading. Uzziah begot Jotham. Jotham begot Ahaz. Ahaz begot Hezekiah. Hezekiah begot Manasseh. Manasseh begot Ammon. Ammon begot Josiah. Josiah begot Jeconiah and his brothers about the time of the deportation to Babylon. And after the deportation to Babylon, Jeconiah begot Shealtiel. Shealtiel begot Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel begot Abiud. Abiud begot Eliakim. Eliakim begot Azor. Azor begot Zadok. Zadok begot Achim. Achim begot Eliud. Eliud begot Eleazar. Eleazar begot Mathan. Mathan begot Jacob. Jacob begot Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. So much for Matthew. Now let's look at Luke. Luke's genealogy, chapter 3, verses 23 to 38. Luke proceeds in the opposite direction. He starts from Jesus and goes back to Adam. Jesus was about 30 years old when he began his ministry. He was, as was supposed, the son of Joseph, the son of Heli. Let's stop at this formulation. As was supposed. Luke takes his distance. He doesn't say, Joseph was the father of Jesus. He says, it was supposed that he was his father. Why this precaution? Because Luke believes in the virgin birth. Joseph is not the biological father of Jesus. But then, why give Joseph's genealogy? If Joseph is not Jesus' father, how does his lineage matter? Keep this question. It's crucial. Let's continue with Luke. Heli, son of Mathat. Mathat, son of Levi. Levi, son of Melchi. Melchi, son of Janai. Janai, son of Joseph. Joseph, son of Mattathias. Mattathias, son of Amos. Amos, son of Nahum. Nahum, son of Esli. Esli, son of Nagai. Nagai, son of Maath. Maath, son of Mattathias. Mattathias, son of Semin. Semin, son of Josech. Josech, son of Joda. Joda, son of Joanan. Joanan, son of Risa. Risa, son of Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel. Shealtiel, son of Neri. Stop. Did you see? In Matthew, Shealtiel is the son of Jeconiah. In Luke, Shealtiel is the son of Neri. Two different fathers for the same man. And it's not over. Neri, son of Melchi. Melchi, son of Addi. Addi, son of Kosam. Kosam, son of Elmadam. Elmadam, son of son of Jesus. Jesus, son of Eleazar. Eleazar, son of Jorim. Jorim, son of Mattat. Mattat, son of Levi. Levi, son of Simeon. Simeon, son of Judah. Judah, son of Joseph. Joseph, son of Jonam. Jonam, son of Eliakim. Eliakim, son of Melea. Melea, son of Menna. Menna, son of Mattatha. Mattatha, son of Nathan, son of David. And there it is. In Matthew, the lineage passes through Solomon. In Luke, it passes through Nathan. Two different sons of David. Two completely distinct branches. Then Luke continues from David to Adam. David, son of Jesse. Jesse, son of Obed. Obed, son of Boaz. Boaz, son of Salmon. Salmon, son of Nahshon. And so on until Seth, son of Adam. Adam, son of God. 77 generations in total, verses 42 in Matthew. Let's recap the divergences. Joseph's father, Jacob in Matthew, Heli in Luke. The Davidic lineage, through Solomon in Matthew, through Nathan in Luke. Shealtiel's father, Jeconiah in Matthew, Neri in Luke. The number of generations between David and Joseph, 27 in Matthew, 42 in Luke. The end point, Abraham in Matthew, Adam, then God in Luke. These are not minor details. These are structural contradictions. Now, let's analyze these contradictions one by one, because each one poses a specific problem, and together they form a devastating picture. Contradiction number 1. Jacob or Heli. Joseph's father is called Jacob in Matthew. He is called Heli in Luke. This is not a minor detail. In the ancient world, a man's identity was defined by his father. They didn't say Joseph of Nazareth. They said Joseph, son of Jacob, or Joseph, son of Heli. It's like two official documents giving two different names for your father. One says, Pierre Martin, son of Jean Martin. The other says, Pierre Martin, son of Paul Dupont. This is not reconcilable. This is a factual contradiction. Does Julius Africanus's solution the levirate hold up? Let's look more closely. For this explanation to work, it would require that 1. Jacob and Heli were half-brothers, same mother, different fathers. 2. The mother, Esther, according to Julius, had successively married 2 men from 2 different Davidic lineages. 3. Heli had died without a child. 4. Jacob had married Heli's widow in accordance with levirate law. 5. Joseph was born from this union. 5 conditions. None is attested by any historical document whatsoever. Problem. There exists no historical trace of this situation. Not in the Gospels, not in any Jewish text, not anywhere else. Julius Africanus did not discover this information. He invented it. He created an ad hoc explanation to resolve an embarrassing problem. The biblical scholar Raymond Brown is categorical. Julius Africanus's hypothesis is speculation without any textual foundation. It rests on pure inventions designed to harmonize 2 irreconcilable accounts. And even if we accepted this explanation, it only resolves the first contradiction. What about the others? Contradiction number 2. Solomon or Nathan? In Matthew, David's lineage passes through Solomon, the glorious son, the builder of the temple, the legendary king whose wisdom was proverbial. In Luke, David's lineage passes through Nathan, another son of David, mentioned only in passing in 2 Samuel 5:14. Who was Nathan? Almost nobody knows. He left no trace in Jewish history, no reign, no known descendants, no exploits. A forgotten son of a famous king. Why would Luke choose this obscure lineage rather than Solomon's royal lineage? Some theologians have suggested that Luke wanted to avoid the curse pronounced against Jeconiah. In Jeremiah 22:30, God says of Jeconiah, also called Coniah, "Write this man down as childless, a man who will not prosper in his days, for none of his descendants will prosper, sitting on the throne of David." Jeconiah is an ancestor of Joseph in Matthew's genealogy. If this curse is taken literally, no descendant of Jeconiah can be king, and therefore Jesus, if he descends from Jeconiah through Joseph, cannot be the Messiah king. Would Luke have chosen Nathan's lineage to avoid this problem? It's possible, but this would mean that Luke consciously constructed an alternative genealogy for theological reasons, which confirms that these genealogies are not history. They are constructions serving a message. Whatever the case, one thing is certain. No levirate explanation can resolve this divergence. These are 2 completely different branches of the family tree, 2 lineages that only cross at David, upstream, and at Joseph, downstream. For more than 1,000 years, from David to Joseph, the 2 genealogies follow completely different paths. This is not a question of legal father versus biological father. This is total divergence. Contradiction number 3. 27 or 42 generations. Between David and Joseph, Matthew counts 27 generations. Luke counts 42, 15 generations apart. Let's do a simple calculation. One generation represents about 25 to 30 years. 15 generations, therefore, represent 375 to 450 years. It's as if someone told you, "My great-grandfather was born in 1900," and someone else said, "No, your great-grandfather was born in 1500. This is not a matter of interpretation. This is a mathematical impossibility. Both cannot be true at the same time. Contradiction number 4. Shealtiel's father. In Matthew, Shealtiel is the son of Jeconiah. In Luke, Shealtiel is the son of Neri. Jeconiah was a king of Judah, a documented historical figure. Neri is unknown. We know nothing about him outside of this genealogy. Who was Shealtiel's real father? The answer is in the Old Testament. 1 Chronicles 3:17 clearly says, "The sons of Jeconiah, Shealtiel." So Matthew is right, and Luke was wrong? Or did he invent? Or was he using a different tradition? In any case, both cannot be true. Contradiction number 5. The purpose of the genealogies. Matthew goes back to Abraham. Why? Because Matthew writes for a Jewish audience. Abraham is the father of the Jewish people. Showing that Jesus descends from Abraham proves that he is Jewish, that he belongs to the chosen people. Luke goes back to Adam, then to God. Why? Because Luke writes for a pagan, non-Jewish audience. By tracing Jesus back to Adam, he shows that Jesus belongs to all humanity, not just to the Jews. The two genealogies have different theological objectives. Matthew wants to prove that Jesus is the Jewish Messiah. Luke wants to prove that Jesus is the universal Savior. And to achieve these objectives, they constructed different genealogies. These are not historical documents. These are theological constructions. For 18 centuries, Julius Africanus's explanation held. Believers accepted it. Theologians repeated it. Preachers taught it. Nobody looked too closely. Oh, some had doubts. Scholars here and there had noticed the weaknesses of the argument. But they kept their doubts to themselves, or expressed them in closed circles among initiates. The price to pay for public questioning was too high. Then came Raymond Brown. Who was Raymond Brown? A Catholic priest, a Sulpician, a churchman through and through, ordained priest in 1953, trained in the best Catholic institutions, faithful to Rome all his life. But also one of the greatest biblical scholars of the 20th century. Brown obtained his doctorate from Johns Hopkins University. He became a professor at Union Theological Seminary in New York, one of the most prestigious seminaries in the world. He was appointed member of the Pontifical Biblical Commission, the Vatican body responsible for overseeing the interpretation of Scripture. In other words, Raymond Brown was the Catholic establishment. He wasn't a rebel, not a marginal, not an enemy of the Church. He was the Church. And that's precisely what makes his work so important. In 1977, Raymond Brown published a monumental book, The Birth of the Messiah. More than 700 pages of meticulous analysis of the infancy narratives in Matthew and Luke. A titan's work, years of research, thousands of references. This book became the academic reference on the subject. Translated into numerous languages, republished several times, cited in thousands of articles and books. And in this book, Brown does something extraordinary. He tells the truth. Not the truth that believers want to hear, the truth that the texts reveal when examined rigorously. Brown didn't write this book to destroy faith. He wrote it because he believed that faith could bear the truth, that believers deserved to know what the texts really said, that obscurantism was not protection, but a prison. Here's what Brown writes about the genealogies. The two genealogies of Matthew and Luke are irreconcilable. No harmonization, proposed over the centuries, has resolved the contradictions satisfactorily. We must accept that the two evangelists constructed their genealogies from different traditions with different theological objectives. A Catholic priest, member of the Pontifical Biblical Commission, who says, "The two genealogies are irreconcilable." Can you imagine the earthquake? Brown goes further. He analyzes Julius Africanus's explanation, the famous levirate, and dismantles it piece by piece. The levirate hypothesis, proposed by Julius Africanus in the 3rd century, is an apologetic construction that rests on no textual or historical basis. It was invented to resolve a theological problem, not to explain a historical reality. Underscore. Brown doesn't mince words. An apologetic construction. In other words, an excuse invented to save appearances. He continues, Julius Africanus invented characters, like Esther, the supposed mother of Jacob and Heli, appear in no ancient text. He created a complete family story from nothing, simply to fill the gaps in his explanation. Invented characters, created a story from nothing. This is no longer theology. This is fiction in service of faith. And Brown asks the real question, the question nobody dared ask. If the genealogies are theological constructions rather than historical documents, what do they really tell us about Jesus? This question changes everything. Because if the genealogies are not historical, if they were constructed to prove something, then they reveal to us not who Jesus was, but what the early Christians wanted him to be. And this distinction is fundamental. Brown identifies 3 major objectives of the genealogies. Objective 1, prove Davidic descent. The Messiah had to be a descendant of David. This was a non-negotiable prophetic requirement. A shoot shall come out from the stump of Jesse. Isaiah 11:1. Behold, the days are coming when I will raise up for David a righteous branch. Jeremiah 23:5. For Jesus to be the Messiah, he had to descend from David. The genealogies are there to prove this descent, whether it was real or not. Objective 2, theologically structure history. Matthew divides his genealogy into 3 periods of 14 generations. From Abraham to David, 14 generations. From David to the deportation, 14 generations. From the deportation to Jesus, 14 generations. Why 14? Because 14 is the numerical value of the name David in Hebrew. D, Daleth, equals 4, V, Vav, equals 6, D, Daleth, equals 4, total 14. Matthew structures his history around David's number. This is numerology, symbolism, theology, not history. Objective 3, respond to accusations. And this is where things become really interesting. Why does Matthew include women in his genealogy? Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba? This is not insignificant. These 4 women all have something in common. Tamar disguised herself as a prostitute to seduce her father-in-law Judah and become pregnant by him. Rahab was a prostitute from Jericho. Ruth was a foreigner, a Moabite who slipped into Boaz's bed. Bathsheba committed adultery with David. 4 women, 4 stories of irregular sexuality. Why does Matthew include them? Brown offers a fascinating answer. Why include women with problematic sexual pasts in the Messiah's genealogy? Let's examine each case. Tamar, Genesis 38. Tamar was Judah's daughter-in-law, one of Jacob's sons. She had married Judah's eldest son, but died without giving her a child. According to levirate law, she then married Onan, Er's brother. But Onan refused to give her a child and died in turn. Judah should have given her his 3rd son, Shelah, but he didn't. Tamar waited. Years passed. Then she made a radical decision. She disguised herself as a prostitute, sat by the roadside and seduced Judah himself, her own father-in-law. She became pregnant by him. From this union, incestuous by modern standards, were born Perez and Zerah. Perez is the ancestor of King David. Rahab, Joshua 2. Rahab was a prostitute from Jericho. When the Israelite spies arrived in her city, she hid them and helped them escape. In exchange, they promised to spare her and her family when Jericho was destroyed. She survived, integrated into the people of Israel, married Salmon, and became King David's great-great-grandmother, a Canaanite prostitute in the Messiah's lineage. Ruth, Book of Ruth. Ruth was a Moabite, a foreigner. The Moabites were despised by the Israelites. Deuteronomy even forbids Moabites from entering Yahweh's assembly until the 10th generation. Yet Ruth married an Israelite. When he died, she remained faithful to her mother-in-law Naomi and accompanied her to Israel. There, on Naomi's advice, she slipped into Boaz's bed, a relative of her late husband, while he slept. The story is told in modest terms, but the implications are clear. Ruth and Boaz had a son, Obed. Obed begot Jesse. Jesse begot David, a Moabite, member of a forbidden people in the Messiah's lineage. Bathsheba, 2 Samuel 11. Bathsheba was the wife of Uriah, a Hittite soldier in David's service. One evening, David saw her bathing from the roof of his palace. He had her brought to him. He slept with her. She became pregnant. To cover his adultery, David had Uriah placed in the front line of battle where he was killed. Then David married Bathsheba. This is one of the darkest stories in the Bible. A king who commits adultery then orchestrates the murder of the betrayed husband. The first child from this union died. The second was called Solomon, Israel's most glorious king, born from adultery and murder. 4 women, 4 stories of irregular sexuality, a disguised prostitute who seduces her father-in-law, a professional prostitute who betrays her people, a foreigner who slips into a man's bed, an adulteress whose husband is murdered. Why does Matthew include them? Raymond Brown's answer is brilliant. Matthew includes these women to prepare the reader for the greatest irregularity of all, Jesus' conception by a virgin, without the intervention of a human father. By showing that God has already worked through sexually irregular situations in the past, Matthew makes the virgin birth more acceptable. In other words, Matthew anticipates an objection. How can Jesus be the Messiah if his birth is tainted with scandal? Matthew's answer: look at history. God has always worked through scandalous situations. Tamar deceived her father-in-law, and yet, from this union was born Perez, David's ancestor. Rahab was a prostitute, and yet she is King David's ancestor. Ruth slipped into Boaz's bed, and yet she is David's great-grandmother. Bathsheba committed adultery, and yet her son Solomon built the temple. Matthew essentially says, irregularity is not an obstacle for God. On the contrary, that's often where he acts. And the fifth woman on the list? Mary. Jacob begot Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. Did you notice the formulation? Matthew doesn't say, Joseph begot Jesus. He says, Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus. The chain of begot is interrupted. Joseph doesn't beget Jesus. Jesus is born from Mary. Matthew prepares the ground for the virgin birth, and the four women with scandalous pasts serve to make this birth acceptable. But here's the question Brown asks. If Matthew must so carefully prepare the ground, if he must include women with problematic pasts to normalize the irregularity of Jesus' birth, doesn't this suggest that this birth was perceived as problematic by contemporaries? In other words, why so much effort to justify something if that something didn't need to be justified? If Jesus had been born from a normal marriage, without any irregularity, Matthew wouldn't have needed to mention Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and Bathsheba. The fact that he mentions them suggests there was something to explain, something to defend, something that bothered people. Jane Scharberg, in her controversial book, The Illegitimacy of Jesus, 1987, goes even further. She suggests that Matthew knew Jesus' birth was irregular, perhaps the result of rape or an illegitimate relationship, and that he constructed his genealogy to transform this scandal into a divine miracle. The enemies of early Christianity accused Jesus of being an illegitimate child. The Talmud, written a few centuries later, refers to Yeshu ben Pantera, Jesus, son of Pantera, suggesting that Jesus was the son of a Roman soldier. The pagan philosopher Celsus in the 2nd century repeats this accusation in his True Discourse. Matthew knew these accusations, and his genealogy is, in part, a response to these accusations. Yes, Jesus' birth was irregular. But look, God has always worked through irregularity. It's brilliant. It's high-level apologetics. But it's not history. It's a theological construction to respond to a social problem. And this construction reveals something crucial to us. From the first decades of Christianity, there were questions about Jesus' birth, rumors, accusations, doubts. The genealogies are not simple lists of names. They are weapons in a battle of legitimacy. Let's recap what we've discovered so far. 2 genealogies, 2 gospels, 2 completely different lists of names. Joseph's father is called Jacob in Matthew, Heli in Luke. The lineage passes through Solomon in Matthew, through Nathan in Luke. 27 generations in Matthew, 42 in Luke, Contradictions that Julius Africanus tried to resolve in the 3rd century with a convoluted explanation. An explanation that Raymond Brown dismantled in the 20th century. Women with scandalous pasts included by Matthew to prepare the ground for a birth that was itself scandalous. But we haven't yet addressed the most serious problem, the paradox that makes the entire edifice collapse. Here is this paradox. The 2 genealogies, Matthew's and Luke's, are supposed to prove that Jesus descends from King David. That's their reason for being, their objective, their function. But both genealogies pass through Joseph. Matthew, Abraham to David to Solomon to Jacob, Joseph, Jesus. Luke, Adam, David, Nathan, Heli, Joseph, Jesus. Joseph is the pivot, the link between David and Jesus. But here's the problem. Matthew and Luke both assert that Jesus was born of a virgin, that Joseph is not Jesus' biological father, that Mary conceived by the action of the Holy Spirit, without masculine intervention. If Joseph is not Jesus' father, if Jesus has no biological link with Joseph, then why give Joseph's genealogy? How can Joseph's lineage prove that Jesus descends from David if Jesus does not descend from Joseph? Do you see the paradox? The genealogies are supposed to prove Jesus' messianic legitimacy, but they pass through a man who is not his father. It's as if someone said, "I am the legitimate heir to the throne because my stepfather was the king." That doesn't work. This paradox is so enormous that theologians have struggled with it for centuries. Some have suggested that Luke actually gives Mary's genealogy, not Joseph's. This is a popular theory in Christian circles. The idea would be that Luke traces Mary's lineage, showing that she too descended from David. Thus, Jesus would be biologically descended from David through his mother. It's appealing, but it doesn't hold up. Look at the text of Luke 3:23. Jesus was about 30 years old when he began his ministry. He was, as was supposed, the son of Joseph, the son of Heli. The text explicitly says, son of Joseph, son of Heli, not son of Mary, daughter of Heli. Heli is presented as Joseph's father, not as Mary's father. For this theory to work, one would have to suppose that Luke wrote Joseph when he meant Mary, or that son of Heli actually means son-in-law of Heli. But nothing in the text suggests this. It's an interpretation invented to resolve an embarrassing problem. Others have invoked legal adoption. Joseph would have adopted Jesus, thus transmitting his dynastic rights to him. But legal adoption as we know it did not exist in 1st century Judaism. It existed in Roman law, yes, but not in Jewish law. An adopted child in the Roman world inherited his adoptive father's rights. But in the Jewish world, lineage was biological. One could not adopt someone into David's lineage. Raymond Brown is categorical. The paradox is unsolvable within the framework of a historical reading. The evangelists wanted to affirm two things simultaneously: that Jesus descends from David through Joseph, and that Joseph is not his biological father. These two assertions are logically incompatible. Two logically incompatible assertions in the same text by the same authors. How is this possible? The answer is simple, but it disturbs. Matthew and Luke weren't writing history. they were writing theology. They had two distinct objectives. 1. Prove that Jesus was the Davidic Messiah, hence the genealogies passing through Joseph. 2. Affirm that Jesus was born miraculously of a virgin, hence the denial of Joseph's paternity. These two objectives were incompatible, but the evangelists pursued them anyway, because both were necessary to their theological message. The Messiah had to descend from David. This was non-negotiable. But Jesus also had to be more than a simple man. He had to be born miraculously, divinely. The evangelists tried to hold both ends, and in doing so, they created a paradox that cannot be resolved. This paradox reveals something fundamental to us about the nature of the Gospels. They are not neutral historical documents. They are theological works constructed to convince. And when theology conflicts with logic, theology wins. We've seen the contradictions. We've seen the paradox. Now, let's ask the real question. Why? Why did Matthew and Luke create two so radically different genealogies? Why didn't they simply copy the same list? Why did they go to such trouble to construct incompatible family trees? The answer is fascinating, because it reveals how the Gospels were written, and for whom. Matthew wrote for a Jewish audience, Jews converted to Christianity, Jews who were still hesitating, Jews who knew their scriptures by heart. For this audience, only one thing mattered: prophecies. The Messiah had to fulfill the prophecies of the Old Testament. Period. So Matthew built his gospel as a demonstration. Every episode of Jesus' life is presented as the fulfillment of a prophecy. The birth in Bethlehem, fulfillment of Micah 5:2. The flight to Egypt, fulfillment of Hosea 11:1. The settlement in Nazareth, fulfillment of a prophecy that no one has ever found. And the genealogy? It had to prove that Jesus was the son of David, the son of Abraham. Matthew structures his genealogy into 3 series of 14 generations. 14, David's number. This is not chance. This is a coded message. Matthew tells his Jewish readers, look, all of Israel's history points to this man. The numbers themselves proclaim it. To achieve this result, Matthew had to cheat. He skipped generations. He omitted kings. He manipulated the list. But no matter. The message was more important than accuracy. Luke, on the other hand, wrote for a completely different audience. Pagans, Greeks, Romans, people who knew nothing about Jewish scriptures. For this audience, Abraham meant nothing. David was an obscure king of a small Oriental people. So Luke did something brilliant. He traced his genealogy back to Adam, to the first man, to God himself. The message is clear. Jesus doesn't belong only to the Jews. He belongs to all humanity. He's not just Israel's Messiah. He's the world's Savior. Luke chooses Nathan's lineage rather than Solomon's. Why? Perhaps to avoid Jeconiah's curse, perhaps because he was using a different tradition, perhaps simply because he didn't know Matthew's genealogy. Don't forget, Matthew and Luke wrote in different regions for different communities, probably without knowing what the other was doing. Matthew wrote in Syria, perhaps in Antioch. Luke wrote somewhere in the Greek world, perhaps in Greece itself. Each constructed a genealogy adapted to his audience. Each made different theological choices. each created a slightly different Jesus. And when, in the 4th century, the Church decided to gather these texts into one book, nobody thought to harmonize the genealogies. Or rather, those who noticed the problem preferred to keep quiet about it. Because admitting that Matthew and Luke contradicted each other was admitting that the Bible was not a monolithic block fallen from heaven. It was admitting that it had been written by men, with different perspectives, different sources, different objectives. And this admission was too dangerous. So explanations were invented. Julius Africanus's levirate, Mary's genealogy in Luke, legal adoption, patches, bandages, intellectual contortions, to preserve the illusion of a perfect, unified, divine text. But the contradictions are there. They've always been there. And they tell us a much more interesting story than the one we were meant to believe. The story of diverse Christian communities with diverse theologies who created diverse texts. The story of a religion that was built not from a unique and monolithic truth, but from a profusion of traditions, narratives, interpretations. And the story of a church that, centuries later, tried to pass off this profusion as unity. This is the story the genealogies tell us, if we accept to read them truly. Let's step back. Let's forget for a moment the contradictions, the numbers, the names that don't match. And let's ask a more fundamental question. What do these genealogies teach us about how religions construct themselves? Because what we observe here is not unique to Christianity. It's a universal mechanism. A mechanism you've seen at work in your own life, even if you've never formulated it this way. Here is this mechanism. When a movement wants to impose itself, it must create roots for itself. It must connect itself to something older, greater, more legitimate than itself. The early Christians had a problem. Jesus was an itinerant preacher from Galilee, a man of low birth, a carpenter, or carpenter's son, from an obscure village, Nazareth, a God-forsaken hole about which the prophet Nathanael said, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" How to convince the Jews that this man was the Messiah? The Messiah had to be a descendant of David, a prince, a king in potentia, not a Galilean artisan. So the Christians did what all movements that want to impose themselves do. They created a lineage. They connected Jesus to David. They fabricated royal roots for a man who had none. Did Joseph really descend from David? Nobody knows. Nobody can verify. In the 1st century, Jewish genealogical records had been largely destroyed. The Temple of Jerusalem, where the archives were kept, was razed by the Romans in 70 AD. Matthew and Luke wrote after this destruction. They couldn't consult the archives. They no longer existed. So, they constructed. They invented. They created genealogies that served their message. And nobody could contradict them, because the evidence had disappeared. This mechanism, creating prestigious roots to legitimize the present, is not specific to Christianity. You find it everywhere, in all cultures, at all times. Roman emperors claimed descent from Aeneas, the Trojan hero, mythical ancestor of Romulus. French kings claimed descent from the Trojans too, through the legendary Francus. Chinese dynasties claimed descent from the Yellow Emperor, a mythical figure 5,000 years old. Every power needs a glorious origin. Every movement needs roots. Every religion needs a lineage. And when these roots don't exist, they're invented. This is not malice. It's not even really lying. It's the construction of meaning. The early Christians sincerely believed that Jesus was the Messiah. And if Jesus was the Messiah, then he had to descend from David. It was a theological necessity. So they created genealogies that proved this descent, not to deceive, but to reveal what they considered a profound truth. Jesus had to be David's son. Therefore he was. Therefore, here is his genealogy. The logic is circular, but it's sincere. And that's perhaps what's most troubling, because it means that perfectly honest people, perfectly convinced, can create facts that aren't facts, not out of malice, out of faith. They don't lie, they believe. And because they believe, they construct evidence for their belief. You've seen this mechanism at work, in families that embellish their history, in nations that rewrite their past, in companies that mythologize their founders. My grandfather was in the resistance. Really? Or did he just survive as he could, and the family embellished the story over the generations? Our country has always defended freedom. Really? Or is this the narrative we tell ourselves to feel on the right side of history? Jesus' genealogies are a textbook case of this phenomenon. Sincere constructions created by convinced believers to prove what they already knew to be true. And the fact that these constructions contradict each other didn't bother them, because the truth they wanted to transmit was more important than factual details. Jesus is the Messiah. That's the truth. The genealogies are just illustrations of this truth. If the illustrations don't correspond perfectly, what does it matter? This is logic foreign to our modern mind. We want facts, evidence, coherence. But for ancient authors, factual coherence was not the priority. Spiritual truth took precedence over historical truth. Raymond Brown, again, explains it perfectly. The evangelists were not historians in the modern sense of the term. They were theologians, preachers, pastors. Their goal was not to report raw facts, but to proclaim a faith. And this proclamation could take liberties with history that we would find unacceptable today. Liberties with history. That's what Jesus' genealogies are. And once you understand this, you can never read the Gospels the same way. Not because they would be false or lying, but because they are something other than what we've been told they were. They are not reports. They are not biographies. They are not neutral historical documents. They are works of faith, theological proclamations, constructions in service of a message. And this message may be true or false, but the evidence we're presented with, the genealogies, the fulfilled prophecies, the miracles, are not evidence. They are illustrations, rhetorical arguments, tools of persuasion. Once you know this, you are free. Free to believe or not to believe, but free with full knowledge of the facts. Let's return to Julius Africanus, this brilliant man of the 3rd century who saw the problem before everyone else, who understood that the two genealogies couldn't both be true at the same time, and who spent hours, days perhaps, constructing an explanation. His levirate explanation was ingenious. It showed profound knowledge of Jewish law. It testified to remarkable intelligence. But it had a fatal flaw. It only resolved one contradiction out of 5. Joseph's father, Jacob, or Heli? Agreed. Let's suppose the levirate explains this difference. Joseph had a biological father and a legal father. Let's accept that. But the other contradictions? Solomon's lineage versus Nathan's lineage. The levirate explains nothing. For the levirate to work, Jacob and Heli would have to be from the same generation, half-brothers through their mother. But their respective lineages, Solomon's and Nathan's, diverge from David himself. 1,000 years of divergence. The levirate can't bridge 1,000 years. The 27 generations versus the 42 generations? The levirate explains nothing. If Jacob and Heli were really half-brothers, contemporaries of each other, how can their respective ancestors differ by 15 generations? It's mathematically impossible. Shealtiel's father, Jeconiah or Neri? The levirate explains nothing. Shealtiel lived 5 centuries before Joseph. Julius Africanus didn't even try to explain this contradiction. Julius Africanus did what all apologists do. He resolved the most visible problem, and he hoped nobody would look too closely at the rest. For 18 centuries, it worked. Believers wanted to believe. They had an explanation. They were satisfied with it. Skeptics didn't have access to the texts. They couldn't verify. Scholars who saw the flaws kept their doubts to themselves. But in the 19th century, something changed. Biblical criticism was born. German university scholars, mainly, began to apply to biblical texts the same analytical methods as to other ancient texts. They compared manuscripts. They studied languages. They examined sources. They asked questions nobody had dared ask. And they discovered what Julius Africanus had tried to hide. The genealogies are not historical documents. They are theological constructions, and they contradict each other. In the 20th century, Raymond Brown delivered the final blow. In The Birth of the Messiah, he systematically examined every harmonization attempt. Julius Africanus's levirate, demolished. Mary's genealogy in Luke, demolished. Legal adoption, demolished. Brown left no escape route. All harmonization attempts fail because they start from a false premise that the two genealogies are historically accurate. Once we abandon this premise, the problem disappears. The genealogies are not history, they are theology, and two different theologies can coexist without needing to be harmonized. Underscore. Two different theologies can coexist. This is a revolutionary idea, because it implies that the Bible is not a unique book with a unique message. It's a library, a collection of texts written by different authors at different times with different perspectives. And these perspectives are not always compatible. Matthew and Luke had different visions of Jesus. Matthew saw the Jewish Messiah, son of David, fulfiller of prophecies. Luke saw the universal Savior, son of Adam, redeemer of all humanity. These two visions are not identical. They overlap, yes, but they are not identical. And their genealogies reflect these differences. Julius Africanus tried to erase these differences. Raymond Brown chose to reveal them. And in revealing them, he rendered an immense service. Not to skeptics, not to atheists, to believers themselves. Because faith that rests on shaky harmonizations is fragile faith. Faith that accepts complexity, tensions, contradictions is adult faith. Brown was a believer. Until his death in 1998, he remained a Catholic priest. He didn't lose faith upon discovering the contradictions. He transformed his faith. From childish faith that needed absolute certainties to adult faith that could embrace mystery. This is perhaps the most important lesson of the genealogies. Truth doesn't destroy what deserves to survive. It only destroys illusions. And what remains after the destruction of illusions is perhaps more precious than what we had before. We've talked about Matthew and Luke, about Julius Africanus and Raymond Brown, about genealogies and contradictions. But this story concerns you directly. Because the mechanism we've discovered, constructing origins to legitimize the present, is not reserved for ancient religions. It's everywhere. It's in you. Let me show you. Each of us carries a story about who we are, where we come from, what defines us. This story, we didn't invent it alone. It was transmitted to us by our parents, by our culture, by our education. And this story contains genealogies, not always in the literal sense, but origin narratives that connect us to something greater. Our family has always been honest and hardworking. Our people have a glorious history. Our religion holds the truth. These narratives give us identity. They anchor us. They reassure us. But are they true? Not always. Not completely. Was your great-grandfather really that hero they described to you? Or was he an ordinary man, with his weaknesses, cowardices, compromises? That family memory gradually transformed into a legendary figure? Has your country really always defended the values it proclaims? Or has official history erased the embarrassing episodes, the crimes, the betrayals? Has your religion really been transmitted intact from its origins? Or has it evolved, changed, adapted to the point of becoming unrecognizable to its founders? These questions are uncomfortable because they threaten our identity. We need to believe that our origins are noble, that our lineage is pure, that our history is glorious. It's human, it's universal, it's understandable. But it's also a trap, because when our identity depends on a narrative, and that narrative proves false, we feel like we're collapsing. This happens to many believers when they discover biblical contradictions. If the Bible isn't perfect, then everything I believed collapses. If the genealogies are invented, then maybe Jesus isn't the Messiah. If the evangelists were wrong about this, what else were they wrong about? Panic, vertigo, the feeling that the ground is giving way. But this reaction is based on an error. The error of believing that our value depends on our origins, that we are what our ancestors were, that our legitimacy comes from our lineage, that our identity is determined by our past. Jesus' genealogies teach us exactly the opposite. Look at what they contain: prostitutes, foreigners, adulterous women, murderer kings, Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba. David himself, the great king, was a murderer and an adulterer. The Messiah's lineage is not pure. It's tainted, full of scandals, crimes, shames. And yet, Matthew didn't hide these shames. He highlighted them. He integrated them into his genealogy. Why? Because the message of early Christianity was precisely this: your origins don't determine your value. Your lineage doesn't define your destiny. What your ancestors did doesn't condemn you. Jesus himself said it, according to the Gospels. Not those who say to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom, but those who do my Father's will. Not lineage, actions. Not origins, choices. Not the past, the present. This is a revolutionary message, especially in an ancient world obsessed with genealogies, castes, lineages. And it's a message that remains revolutionary today, because we're still obsessed with origins, with DNA, with heredity, with roots. I'm depressed because my mother was depressive. I'm violent because my father was violent. I can't succeed because my family never succeeded. Genealogical prisons, cages built with family tree branches. But these cages aren't real. They exist only in our minds. You are not your ancestors. You are not your DNA. You are not your lineage. You are what you choose to be, now, today. The genealogies of Matthew and Luke may be invented. Maybe Joseph didn't descend from David. Maybe this whole construction was theological fiction. But the message they carry, perhaps despite themselves, remains true. What matters is not where you come from, it's where you're going. And this truth doesn't need genealogy to be proven. It's proven every day, in every choice you make, in every act of courage, kindness, lucidity. You are your own ancestor, the founder of your own lineage. What you do with your life will be your genealogy, not the one you inherited, the one you will create. Here we are. We've come a long way together. From that chamber in Caesarea where Julius Africanus trembled before his discovery, to Raymond Brown, who, 18 centuries later, had the courage to tell the truth. We've seen two genealogies that cannot both be true at the same time, two incompatible lineages for the same man, two theological constructions created to convince different audiences. We've seen how religions construct themselves, how they fabricate prestigious origins, how they create evidence for pre-existing beliefs. And we've seen how this mechanism transcends religion, how it touches our personal, family, national identities, how we are all, in a certain way, the authors of our own genealogies. If you've made it this far, it's because something in you seeks truth. Not the comfortable truth we've been told since childhood, the truth that disturbs, that questions, that liberates. This search has a price, the price of time, the price of effort, the price of discomfort. And this channel has a price too. Not a mandatory financial price, never. This content is free. It will remain so. But if you want this work to continue, if you want these researches to go on, if you think this type of content has its place in an ocean of superficiality, you can do something. You can join the YouTube community of this channel. The link is in the description. It's not much, a few euros per month, but it's what allows this work to exist. You can also buy me a book, the second link in the description. Every book you offer me nourishes the research for the next videos. All the works I cited today, Raymond Brown, Jane Schaberg, the primary sources, are listed in the description, with links to order them. You can verify, you can read, you can delve deeper. Never believe me at my word. always verify. It's the only way to truly learn. And if you can't support financially, that's okay. Really. You can like this video. You can share it with someone who seeks, like you, to understand. You can leave a comment. Agree or disagree, it doesn't matter. Every interaction helps the algorithm show this content to other people, to other truth seekers, to other free minds. Now, I leave you with a question. The philosophical question I promised you. The one that has no easy answer. The one you'll have to meditate on yourself. Here it is. If Jesus' identity, Son of David, Messiah of Israel, rests on invented genealogies, if his messianic legitimacy depends on theological constructions rather than historical facts, does that invalidate his message? Or does it, on the contrary, strengthen it? Because if Jesus didn't need to really be the Son of David to say what he said, if his teaching stood without the crutch of a royal genealogy, then perhaps his message was greater than his origins, greater than his lineage, greater than his disciples' constructions. And perhaps that's true for you too. Perhaps what you have to offer the world is greater than your family name, greater than your heritage, greater than the story you've been told about yourself. Jesus' genealogies are broken. They don't work. They contradict each other. And yet, 2 billion people still follow his teaching. Proof that what really matters is never in the family tree. It's in the fruits you bear. Meditate on that. And never forget, it's not where you come from that matters. It's what you do with where you are. That's the necessary perspective.